It was just another busy morning at the airport. People in business suits shuffled through terminals, coffee in one hand and phones in the other. Families wrestled with strollers and luggage, while announcements echoed over the intercom, calling passengers to gates. Nobody really paid attention to anyone but themselves, lost in their own worlds. But among all the rush there was one man who moved slowly, not because he wanted to, but because his knees didn't work like they used to. His name was Frank. A tall, slim man, once full of strength and fire, now bent slightly at the back, with silver hair that peeked out from under a worn cap that read U.S. Marine Corps, retired. The kind of man you'd call sir without thinking about it twice. He carried only one small duffel bag and walked with a cane that clicked against the airport floor. Frank wasn't flying for pleasure. He never had that luxury. He was headed to Texas to visit his daughter and his newborn grandson, who had been born a month premature. It was a trip he wouldn't miss for the world. Even though traveling had become harder, his heart was stronger than his knees. He walked up to the gate, ticket in hand, just a few minutes before boarding began. The airline crew, two young flight attendants in sharp uniforms, and a tall man, in a blazer with a walkie-talkie clipped to his belt, stood behind the counter chatting casually. Frank gave them a polite smile and waited his turn. When he finally reached the front, he handed over his ticket. The young woman behind the counter scanned it, looked up at him and frowned. "Sir, you're not in first class," she said with a forced smile. "We're boarding priority and first class right now." Frank nodded. "I understand, but I was told I could pre-board because of my condition. I have a service-connected injury and trouble walking through the aisle." She glanced at her co-worker. The tall man with the walkie-talkie stepped in. "We can't let everyone with a cane pre-board, sir," he said, not even trying to sound polite. "Please take a seat. We'll call your group." Frank stayed calm. He'd dealt with worse than this in his lifetime. "I understand you've got a process. I'm not asking for special treatment, just a little understanding." The attendant gave a quick, tight smile and turned away. "Next, please." Frank stepped aside, leaning on his cane, trying not to let the sting show on his face. He wasn't the type to make a scene, but deep down, it did hurt. Not just the rejection, but the way they looked at him like he was some burden. Some old man holding up their schedule. What none of them noticed, however, was the man seated quietly a few feet away in a plain black hoodie and jeans. He had no briefcase, no watch, no signs of wealth or importance, just an observant eye and a silent phone in his hand. His name was Adam, but no one there knew he was the actual owner of the entire airline. Adam had built his empire from scratch. He'd started as a baggage handler in his 20s, working double shifts, saving every dime. Over time, he learned the business inside out, from maintenance to operations to customer service. And when the chance came, he'd taken a massive risk, bought a failing airline and turned it around. He didn't just own the company, he understood it. And now, as he watched the scene unfold, he felt a slow anger rising. Not loud or dramatic, but deep and quiet. The kind that sat heavy, in the chest. He recognized Frank's uniform cap immediately. His own father had served in the Marines and had passed away just 2 years ago. This old man reminded him of his father. Same calm demeanor, same patience even when disrespected. Adam watched as the old veteran took a seat near the gate, clearly in discomfort. Not one crew member offered assistance. They were too busy, laughing, scrolling their phones, and occasionally shouting out boarding instructions. Minutes passed, groups were called, people lined up. The gate agents moved quickly, barely making eye contact with the passengers. When Frank's group was finally called, he stood slowly, wincing, and limped toward the line. He nearly stumbled when his cane caught the edge of a suitcase left in the walkway, but he caught himself just in time. Still, no one helped. Adam stood up, quietly, casually. He didn't rush or cause a scene. He walked over to the gate desk just as Frank was about to board. "Excuse me," Adam said softly to the attendant who had earlier turned Frank away. She looked up, annoyed at being interrupted. "Yes, sir? Boarding passes, please." Adam didn't hand her a boarding pass. He handed her a business card, just one. She took it, rolled her eyes slightly until she read it. The color drained from her face. Her mouth opened slightly. "Adam, leaned in and whispered, "That gentleman you ignored? That's a decorated war veteran. You just disrespected the very values this company is built on." The gate manager, the man with the walkie-talkie, came over confused. "What's going on here?" Adam turned to him. "What's going on is a failure in basic human decency, in common courtesy, and in your training. You denied assistance to a disabled veteran while chatting and scrolling your phones. You think this is what I built my company to stand for?" The gate manager blinked. "Sir, I didn't know who he was." "That's the problem," Adam said, his voice firm but calm. "You don't have to know who someone is to treat them with respect." The entire boarding area had gone silent. A few passengers nearby were now watching, unsure whether to pull out their phones or look away. Frank had turned around too, surprised at the sudden tension. He noticed Adam now and the strange reaction of the crew. "Sir," Adam called gently, walking over to Frank, "would you allow me to escort you onto the plane?" Frank gave a slow nod. "If it's no trouble." "It's no trouble at all," Adam replied. "It's an honor." Adam gently placed a hand on Frank's back, just enough to steady him without being disrespectful. As they walked down the jet bridge, the air was thick, not from the temperature but from the silent shame hanging over the crew. The same. Flight attendants who had ignored the old veteran earlier were now scrambling to look busy, offering fake smiles that Adam didn't return. The passengers inside the plane turned their heads as Adam stepped in first, holding the door open like a chauffeur. Frank followed slowly, his cane clicking quietly on the narrow metal floor. A flight attendant near the front recognized Adam, not from TV or magazines, but from the internal company training videos, the ones where the founder of the airline personally spoke about leading with dignity. She looked like she'd seen a ghost. "Good afternoon, sir," she stammered. "We weren't expecting." Adam raised a hand gently to cut her off. "Please make sure this gentleman is seated comfortably. Give him anything he needs. And notify the captain that he's on board. He deserves that much." Frank looked up at Adam with humble confusion. "I don't want to cause a fuss." Adam smiled. "You didn't cause a thing. You've earned this long before today." They guided Frank to first class, the very seats the crew had denied him earlier, and made sure he was seated in the most comfortable one. A pillow, blanket, water already waiting. Not a single other first-class passenger said a word. In fact, one of them even nodded respectfully at Frank as he passed. Once Frank was settled, Adam turned to head back toward the terminal, but not before whispering to the head flight attendant, "Keep an eye on him, and don't let anyone treat him like anything less than family." As Adam stepped off the plane, he pulled out his phone and began typing. Not an angry rant, not a fiery threat, but a short, direct email to the airline's regional operations manager. Subject: Immediate personnel review, Flight 302. A veteran was denied proper boarding support today at Gate C4. Crew lacked empathy and failed to follow airline protocol. I personally observed the incident. I expect a full report on corrective actions within 48 hours. Names attached. Adam K. By the time the plane was in the air, 3 crew members from the gate staff had already been placed under review, and a retraining notice was sent to the entire airport team. Adam didn't enjoy firing people, but he had zero tolerance for disrespect, especially toward those who had given everything to serve others. Meanwhile, in the sky, Frank looked out the window, the clouds stretching far below. A tear rolled down his cheek. He wasn't the emotional type. War had hardened his heart long ago, but something about that moment, being seen, being respected without asking, touched something deep inside. The same crew who had earlier treated him like a nuisance now offered him coffee, meals, extra help. It felt strange, almost too late, but he nodded and accepted it quietly. He wasn't the type to hold grudges. Back in the cabin, a young woman seated next to Frank leaned over. "Excuse me, sir," she said softly. "Were you really in the military?" He nodded. "Marine Corps, 22 years. "My grandfather was in the Navy," she smiled. "He always said the Marines were the toughest," Frank chuckled. "We like to think so." For the first time that day, Frank felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not just respect, but connection. He spoke with the young woman for a while, telling her stories about distant lands, long marches, and the brothers he'd lost along the way. He didn't brag. He never did. But when she looked at him, she saw something her generation didn't often get to witness: living history. As the flight neared its destination, the pilot made a surprising announcement over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain. So I'd like to take a moment to recognize one of our passengers today, Staff Sergeant Frank Dawson, retired Marine Corps, who served this country for over 2 decades. On behalf of this crew and this airline, we thank you for your service." The cabin erupted in applause. Some stood, others just looked toward Frank with admiration. He nodded politely, shrinking a little in his seat. He wasn't used to the spotlight. Down below at the arrival gate in Texas, Frank's daughter, a kind-looking woman in her 30s, waited with a baby carrier strapped to her chest. She looked exhausted but excited. Her eyes scanned the arriving passengers nervously. When Frank appeared, she rushed forward. "Dad!" she cried. He smiled, and even before his cane could find the floor, she had wrapped him in a hug. Carefully, gently, she stepped back and held up the baby. "Meet James. I told him his grandpa was a hero. Now he finally gets to see him." Frank's voice broke as he leaned in, touching the baby's tiny fingers. "Hey there, little Marine." As they walked out of the terminal together, he didn't look back. He didn't see the headlines that would follow the next day, or the viral story posted by another passenger who'd witnessed everything. He didn't know that Adam, the airline owner, had just started a company-wide policy named the Frank Dawson Protocol, ensuring all veterans would receive pre-boarding access and priority support from now on. All Frank knew was this. For once, someone had seen him not as an old man with a cane, but as a man who had once stood tall when the world needed him to. And that meant everything. The morning after the flight, a quiet storm was brewing in the airline's corporate headquarters. Adam had barely sat down in his corner office when his assistant burst in, holding a tablet. "You're going viral," she said flatly. Adam raised an eyebrow. "For what?" She handed him the tablet. A video, clearly recorded by a fellow passenger, showed the gate incident from the day before. The shaky footage caught the full interaction. Frank being ignored, the crew rolling their eyes, and then Adam stepping in. The caption read, "Old veteran denied entry until this man stepped in. Turns out he owns the airline." It had over 2 million views already. Comments flooded in, most praising Adam, others condemning the crew. But more importantly, veterans from across the country started sharing their own stories, some eerily similar. Many had been forgotten, disrespected, overlooked. Adam read in silence, jaw tight, heart heavier than ever. "I want a meeting with the executive board," he said finally. "Today." His assistant nodded. "Already on it." By noon, a dozen department heads sat around a polished table in the glass-walled boardroom. Most were older men in suits, used to profit margins and quarterly reports. Few had military backgrounds. Fewer still had ever truly considered the veterans, boarding their flights every day with aching joints and faded uniforms under civilian clothes. Adam didn't bother with slides or graphs. "I built this airline after walking away from 3 failed companies," he began. "You know how? I focused on the people, not just the flyers in first class, everyone." He paused, then clicked the tablet. Frank's video played again. "This man served this country longer than most of us have had jobs. And yesterday our crew treated him like he was a problem." Silence. Adam paced slowly. "Most of you don't know this, but I enlisted at 18. Army infantry. I got out after 5 years, started fresh. But I never forgot what it meant to be overlooked the moment the uniform came off." Now he had their full attention. "I want every gate agent, every attendant, every pilot retrained, not next year, not next quarter, now. If they can't treat veterans with honor, they don't work for us. Period." One executive shifted, uncomfortably. "Adam, with all due respect, it's an isolated incident." Adam slammed his palm lightly on the table. "It's not isolated. It's just the only one caught on camera." Another executive chimed in, trying to soften the blow. "We can put out a press statement. Make a donation. Let it blow over." Adam shook his head. "We're not covering this up. We're owning it." That day, a memo went out across the entire airline network. "Effective immediately, veteran priority protocol. All U.S. veterans and active duty personnel are entitled to pre-boarding, priority seating when available, and complimentary onboard services. Training will be updated across all departments. Violations of this policy will result in immediate review. Let's honor those who've honored us. Adam K., CEO. Meanwhile, Frank had no idea any of this was unfolding. He was sitting in his daughter's kitchen, a warm cup of black coffee in hand, the baby sleeping on his chest. "You're famous, Dad," she said, laughing as she showed him her phone. He squinted. "What is this? YouTube?" "Yeah. Someone filmed the whole thing. It's everywhere. Look, they're calling you the Silent Sergeant." Frank frowned. "I didn't ask for this." "I know, but maybe it's good. Maybe people will start listening." He didn't respond. Instead, he stared at the screen, at the image of himself looking tired and alone at that gate. For the first time, he realized just how invisible he had become to the world, until someone decided not to look away. Later that afternoon, there was a knock on the door. A delivery man handed Frank a package. Inside was a sleek wooden box with the airline's logo carved into the lid. He opened it slowly. Inside was a custom-made plaque that read, "To Staff Sergeant Frank Dawson, for your service, your silence, and your strength. You reminded us all how to lead with honor." There was also a handwritten letter from Adam himself. "Frank, you may not remember me after all these years. I was a young private on the range at Fort Benning. Cow taught me how to shoot straight and think straighter. I never forgot that. Yesterday you reminded me again, thank you." Adam K. Frank's hands shook a little as he read the letter. He remembered that scrawny private, always double-checking. His aim always standing a little too stiff. He looked at the baby, then at the plaque. Maybe, just maybe, some things did come full circle. 3 days later, the national news picked up the story. Frank didn't see it at first. He didn't spend much time on the internet. But his daughter was glued to her phone that morning and gasped so loud, she woke the baby. "Dad, you're on CNN," she whispered. Frank gave her a sideways glance. "What for? I didn't do anything special." She turned the screen toward him. There he was, sitting quietly at the gate in that viral video, cane in hand, looking patient but tired. The headline read, "Airline CEO intervenes after veteran is disrespected. Sparks nationwide policy change." By noon, talk shows were running with the story. Commentators praised Adam's bold move, veterans groups started organizing thank you events, and flight attendants from other airlines began sharing stories of veterans they had met over the years. Some beautiful, some painful, all long ignored. Frank became the quiet symbol of something much bigger. The knock at the door came just after lunch. His daughter answered while Frank rocked slowly in the chair, baby James resting on his shoulder. 2 men in suits stood outside. "Is this the residence of Staff Sergeant Frank Dawson?" one asked. She hesitated. "Yes." "Is something wrong?" The second man smiled. "Quite the opposite." They introduced themselves as representatives from the Department of Veterans Affairs and handed her a sealed folder. Frank watched from his chair, confused, until his daughter handed him the papers. He opened them slowly. Inside was a formal letter, a set of documents and something else, a medal, the Congressional Veterans Honor Citation. His eyes narrowed as he read, "For exemplary conduct and integrity in and out of service, awarded in recognition of personal character that inspired systemic change." Frank leaned back, speechless. "We also arranged a speaking invitation," the VA rep said gently. "Veterans Advocacy Summit next month. They want you to share your story, nothing flashy, just the truth." Frank chuckled. "I'm not a talker." The man smiled. "You didn't have to be, Sergeant. You already said more in silence than most men say with a microphone." Later that night, Frank sat outside on the porch, looking up at the sky. His daughter joined him with 2 mugs of tea. "Did I ever tell you," he said softly, "that I almost didn't make it home from Fallujah?" She looked at him, surprised. "No, you never talked about it." He nodded slowly. "We lost 6 guys that day. I took a piece of shrapnel just below the ribs. Figured it was over. But I woke up in a field hospital 2 days later." He sipped his tea. I think I stopped talking about that stuff because once you're home, no one really listens. They want a salute and a flag on the 4th of July, but not the parts that hurt, not the pieces we leave behind. His daughter leaned her head on his shoulder. They're listening now, Dad? He didn't answer right away. The baby stirred in the next room. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked in the distance. You think people really change? He asked quietly. She looked up. I think they forget until someone reminds them. A few days later, a letter arrived. Not from the government or the airline, but from a little boy in Wisconsin. Crayon handwriting on lined notebook paper. Dear Mr. Frank, my dad is a soldier too. I saw you on the computer and I think you are very brave. I want to be like you when I grow up. Thank you for being strong. Love, Nathan. Age 9. Frank read it twice. Then he folded it neatly and slid it into the box with the plaque and medal. It was the only thing that made him cry. Meanwhile, at the airline's corporate office, Adam was facing his own storm. Not backlash, quite the opposite. Letters poured in from veteran families, shares of the airline jumped. Public trust hit a 10-year high. But Adam wasn't satisfied. He called a meeting with the board again. I don't want this to be a headline, he said. I want it to be a movement. What are you suggesting? Asked the CFO. A full foundation, Adam replied. Funded by the airline, run independently. Flights for veterans to visit families. Counseling support at airports. Career transitions for those retiring from service. The room went quiet. There's our legacy, Adam added. Let's make sure we don't waste it. He walked out of the room that day knowing something had shifted, not just in the company, not just in the public, in the soul of a nation that had looked away from its quiet heroes for too long.